And welcome to another class in the bunker. Welcome to everybody who's catching this, whether it is on Facebook or sometimes we have almost as many on YouTube now. And then just a reminder that you can go to Apple Podcast under LDS class discussions with Kevin Hinckley and pick up the podcast on that and listen to us while you vacuum. Wouldn't that be lovely? Okay, and so let's go ahead and get started. And some people are going to look at this and go, "What a really odd title! The triumph of the heel grabbers." Well, as we're going to talk about kind of extensively, we are heel grabbers in some really wonderful sort of ways. So let's start off with a statement from Joseph Smith. He gave this in 1842. It's actually in section 127. He gives this in 1842, and this is after being in liberty, and he's just been able to challenge Missouri's governor, who's wanting to extradite him for shooting Governor Boggs, which he didn't do, but the state wants to get him there, and Illinois says, no, we're not going to extradite him. So he's feeling some sense of relief in 1842. And then he records this statement, which I think is just perfect for Joseph Smith. Here's what he says. "And as for the perils which I am called to pass through, they seem but a small thing to me. But as the envy and wrath of man have been my common lot all the days of my life, and for what cause it seems mysterious," then he says, "but nevertheless, deep water is what I want to swim in." Deep water is what I want to swim in. And you look at the breadth of Joseph's life, that the more he grew and developed, the more opposition he faced, pushing back against him. And so much so that they had to kind of keep moving and kept being driven out from place to place. Certainly deep water was what he was wont to swim in. I think we're aware of that as we've gone through this last year and even into the first part of this for those in Texas enduring having power outages and biting cold and broken pipes, and it just seems like lately we're swimming in deep water. And that seems to be one of those things that we have a tendency to go through them, and then there's at least some kind of the natural man part of us wants to go, "Really, Lord? Really? I thought I was doing okay. What's going on? How come things are such a struggle? How come I'm having such a hard time with what's going on? And it just seems like I fixed one hole in the dike and another one seems to pop out." And it may seem to us at times like we also are swimming in deep waters. Deep waters meaning we don't know what's underneath the water, and it just seems like it goes on and on and on and on. Okay? So we're going to talk today about this swimming in deep water, and we're going to talk about wrestling, because that seems to be the nature of the beast. As we're going to talk a bit about Jacob, our common ancestor here, because brothers and sisters, we proclaim, and our patriarchal blessings want to tell us that we are of the house and family of Israel. And we need to recognize where that word comes from, Israel, and what it means, because it's endemic and it says something about who we are. We need to understand that Jacob, the grandson of Abraham, was given the name Israel because the Lord is going to declare, and we'll get to this in just a minute, not Jacob shall your name hence be said, but Israel. For why? Because you have striven with God and in man and won out. To be a member of a tribe of Israel, to be of the family of Israel, to receive the blessings of Israel, is to be connected to somebody who strove with God and with men and won out. But we're still wrestling. We're still striving. It is the nature of mortality to strive and to have to wrestle with a variety of things. And it starts even from the beginning with Abraham, or with Adam and Eve, and they're given two competing commandments: multiply and replenish, and you're commanded to not eat the fruit. Well, they're having to strive with themselves and with God to say, how do we handle two competing ideas? Paul in Romans 7 talks about, I don't do the things that I want to do, meaning that his earthly man, as he called it, was always battling against the spiritual man, and that there was a battle and there was a conflict going on inside of him. And then certainly Paul's experience that Joseph Smith certainly connected with and understood with was that in city to city to city to city, he is sometimes being driven out, and he's having to strive not just with God, but sometimes with the Greeks, and then with the Jews, and then with the Romans, and then with the members of the church. And it just like Joseph, Paul was always swimming and striving and having to wrestle. And that seems to be our lot, is that we are to be wrestlers and strivers with the promise that one day we'll win out. But man, when we're in the middle of those kind of things, it just doesn't seem like we're winning very often. Or we win and it seems to be a small battle or a temporary battle, to the point that we get to be like the Roman emperors who would ride into Rome at the head of a victory procession, and behind him is all the slaves and the spoils of war, and in that chariot would be a slave in the ear of that Roman emperor going, all victory is fleeting, all victory is fleeting, and be grateful for this because tomorrow it may not be true. So how do we wrestle? How do we strive? How do we strive and not get discouraged and keep on moving in the things that we're trying to do? How do we do this? Well, it's one of the reasons why I want to take today and talk about and get a better sense of how exactly did Jacob do it. And what was the original name of Jacob before it becomes Israel? Because that's pretty fascinating. And it might really resonate with us in particular. Okay? So, when did Jacob, who becomes Israel, need to strive, need to wrestle? Well, it starts happening before he's even born. And we're not talking about the war in heaven. We're talking about while he's in Rebekah's womb. And she is promised before she has kids that there are going to be two nations grow within her. And they will strive and wrestle with one another. And if you've seen the battle between Israel and Palestinians and Israel and Arabs, you see that certainly was passed down the line. But there are two nations in you, and they will strive with one another, but the younger will rule over the older one. Now, I got to think, if your mom, Rebecca, who the last thing she wants to watch is her kids arguing and fighting among each other, wouldn't she kind of said, Lord, wouldn't it be easier if the younger one was the older one because he's born first? If the one that's going to be in charge, shouldn't he be born first? It's not how this works, and it's not how it works in most of the Old Testament. So, the younger will rule over the older one. And the children did struggle within her, so she's feeling not just movement, but they're already wrestling. And she says, if it be so that the younger one's going to rule, why am I thus? Why? And she went to inquire of the Lord, and she doesn't really get an answer. But here's what happens at birth. And after that, his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. And because of that, he was called Jacob, and it means heel holder. Well, the King James Version is kind on that, because the more literal version of that isn't just heel holder, it's heel grabber. As Esau is emerging from the womb, Jacob's holding on to his heel and kind of pulling it and being pulled out along with that. He's hanging on. And they'll say, wow, he's a Jacob, meaning he's a heel grabber. He's holding on. Now, think holding on to the iron rod, and you're going to have a closer idea to what we should be doing, because if we are of Israel who has strived with God and man, we start off as Jacob, the heel grabber, and we are hanging on for dear life. Okay? So he's going to be Jacob from day one, but again, it'll be the heel grabber that ends up keeping the commandments and being the one that is going to receive the birthright blessings. Oh yeah, the birthright blessings. Little striving going on there. Well, again, it wasn't because the fact that Esau was born first continues to cause problems for the heel grabber, who needs to be the one who gets the birthright blessing. And Rebekah, having that foreknowledge of God about what's going to happen, she's got to figure out a way to do it. So when we talk about Jacob grabbing and having to hold on, again, at the giving of the birthright, it's Rebekah that has to switch hands so that those blessings are given on the right place. And in the eyes of Esau, this has been stolen from him. He has a birthright stolen. Okay, so because of that then, Jacob then needs, at the prompting of mom, because she's overhearing Esau saying, when dad dies, I'm going to kill him. Jacob's going to need to leave town. And he's going to have to leave the land of his birthright and go with his uncle, Laban, in search of a wife. Now, keep in mind, they did this with Isaac, but this time they sent a servant to go find Rebekah and bring her back. In the case, they could have done this with Jacob, the heel grabber. But mom says, nah, I think you should go yourself. And she says to Isaac, he needs to go spend time with Laban because I don't like the Hittite women. What she's not telling Isaac is, we need to get him out of town because he's going to, he may get killed by his brother. It just is not turning out very well. Okay, so Jacob needs to then leave, and we know this story, and it's one of those kind of interesting love stories that we know in the Old Testament. Remember that he's going to show up, and what happens? He's going to fall in love with Rachel, and he's going to serve for 7 years, and then Lehi is kind of inserted in by Laban to make sure that she has a husband, and he doesn't know till the wedding night, oh my gosh, it's Leah. And then he's going to have to serve, he will get Rachel within that week, but he's going to have to serve another 7 years, so he's going to be there for 14 years, and he's going to end up with Rachel and Leah and their handmaids, 4 wives, 11 kids, and then he's going to be told by the Lord, it's time to go home. and Jacob, the heel grabber, is going to say, but my brother wants to kill me. No, it's time to go home. Go back. You'll be safe. Don't worry about it. So here is Jacob struggling with himself. And he's got to take his wives and his kids, and hopefully, and then remember, they're almost there, and the word goes out from servants that says, Esau's coming. And he's bringing lots of guys. And then here comes this massive wrestle that is going to cause Jacob to have to work out how does he battle his fear alongside his faith. Now, let me stop at this moment, because again, this is one of those moments, brothers and sisters, that this is us. Part of being Jacob holding on to a heel or holding on to an iron rod is we're having to sometimes hold on to our faith in the face of fear. Did the Lord really mean to bless me? Am I really worthy? Am I really going to get what it is that I need? Do I really believe that when my parents die or there's a death, that on the other side they are waiting for me? Do I really believe that? And sometimes, as we're going to talk about right at the end, that wrestle is with ourselves. We'll have a self-striving and a self-wrestle. But we're going to hone that ability to hold on based on our other experiences in life. And certainly for Jacob, he had been wrestling all of his life. And then he's going to stand there at the brook, and he's going to put his family on the other side of the river, and he's going to then go and pray and try and get some answers. And then we get the very, very classic moment for Jacob. Because he's in the returning home. He's going to then pray, and then he's going to have him wait on the other side of the river. And when Jacob was left alone, and there he wrestled a man with him until the breaking of day. Now, biblical commentators have looked at this experience, and sometimes quite literally, and it's hard for them to either understand what kind of man he was wrestling, or if this is an angel that he's wrestling, or even because he will ultimately say, I've seen God face to face, how can he wrestle with God? God, first of all, wouldn't get in the mud and wrestle with a mortal. Secondly, it's a mismatch. You don't wrestle God on equal terms. You know, he knows more. This is God. Okay? So they've tried to take this literally and not really understand it. But this is why we need to put on our symbolic spiritual eyes to see what exactly is being said here, because it's really pretty powerful. Okay? And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, this is God kind of saying he's not prevailing necessarily. He touched the hollow of his thigh. And everybody goes, what? And the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. Now, again, without some context, without understanding, this gets really weird. What the heck is going on? And in fact, I read through some of the biblical commentaries earlier this week, and they're just like, well, you know, they're trying to explain the biblical thigh thing. More than likely, this has a very clear understanding, and that is between two men who were going to create a covenant and a promise between them. It was a very common practice in the Near East to execute a contract is that each man would take his hand and place it on the inside of the thigh of the other man, because it's close to the fruitfulness. I swear by, in other words, you're kind of saying, I swear by my kids that I will fulfill this promise. So in all likelihood, what is happening here isn't so much, he's wrestled so much that his hip has popped out of joint. What he's saying is he strove so intently with God that he was able to receive the promised covenant and the promised promises that were given to his grandfather and to his father. And this covenant God is remaking with Jacob, that he will receive all these blessings: land, prosperity, posterity, priesthood. All of that's going to be coming, and that's symbolic in this description, I believe, of this weird little element here of the thigh and stuff like that. It's very much a poetic way of saying Jacob strove powerfully to get the covenants that God had promised him. And he strove with his righteousness, and he strove with his earnestness, and he strove with his faith. But held on, almost like he had held on at birth, to Esau's heel. He is now holding on to God and not letting go, even though he's surrounded by fear of what is about to happen the next morning with Esau coming with all of these men. Will they be killed, or can he rely on God's promise? God, for his part, says, and he's going to say, let me go, for the day breaketh. And he says, I will not let go except thou bless me. You can hear that covenant and that striving. I will not let go. I will not let go of my faith. I will not let go in my trust in these promises. I will not let go till I get those promises. The heel grabber is still holding on tightly. And we know at this moment, and it's one of the, to me, it's one of the really beautiful moments that in so many ways has some symbolism back to the atonement. Because here comes Esau, and Jacob, in his humility, will bow down over and over 7 times until he comes near his brother. You see kind of this broken heart and this contrite spirit and this desire to have this reconciliation with his brother. And what he's going to get then, and Esau ran to meet him and embraced him, and the record says, and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. For all of the striving and the worrying and the fearing. What a great, great moment that Esau, who he has feared, will be the one that will embrace him and love him and reconcile with him. And he is really at that point fulfilling his sense of Israel, one who strives with God and man and prevails. That heel grabber has held on until he got the blessings that he needed. Now, I want to pause for just a second in this, because there's a very, it's in understanding this moment, I need to link it with another experience, and it's going to harken back a little bit to what we were talking about last week, and tie something together that is an unfolding of an understanding that perhaps we haven't ever really kind of seen before. And it's going to be this. And that's going to be for us to take a much closer look at the deeper meaning of the parable of the prodigal son. We talked last time about the prodigal son. This is the moment where in Capernaum, Jesus is standing in his doorway. The Pharisees are standing in the street. They're looking over his shoulder and they're seeing the sinners eating at his table. And they're asking him, what in the heck is he doing? Rabbi, what are you doing? And remember, he's going to give 3 parables. Lost sheep, lost coins, and lost sons. And the third, a man had 2 sons. And he's going to give us this parable of the prodigal son. that we love so much. And as we were talking about, remember that the younger son is going to sell. He has to sell off a third of the land to get the money to go squander it. So the family property is devalued by a third. And he's going to go off and he's going to spend it. And he goes off in riotous living, and we know that story. And then remember, again, he's going to come to himself. We might say he begins to wrestle with himself. And now he's going to come back expecting to be a servant. And you remember, his father is going to run to meet him, bringing his servants, and he's going to say, put the ring on his finger, put the robe on there, put shoes on his feet. My son was lost, now he's found. Now, ahead of that, incredible moment when if that son was showing up into town, into a village that would have maybe thrown him out because of the way he disrespected man in the village, and father had to actually go out to meet him and protect him for the backlash of the town. How does he respond to him? Well, remember, he's going to do it in a very passionate sort of way. And listen to the way that Jesus frames this story. And I want you to see it against the backdrop of Jacob and Esau and their reconciliation. Because what Jesus does at this moment is masterful, and I have to admit, I had not seen it before this week. And it kind of blew me away when I realized exactly what I think Jesus was doing. The prodigal son. And he arose, this son, and he came to his father. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him. And then listen. And had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. Esau ran to meet him, embraced him, fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. We can't be sure, but it's almost, I believe, that what Jesus is doing is a very deliberate tying in this story of the prodigal son to Jacob and Esau, because he's going to use the same language. When we see the same language being used, that should jump out at us in trying to interpret and understand Scripture, because it's meant that those two verses should be linked if the language is the same. And Jesus would have known his Hebrew Scriptures and this story very well, and so did the Pharisees. This would have leaped out of, if it's what I think it is, it would have leapt out at the Pharisees, and they would have seen the immediate link to Jacob and Esau. Remember, we're the children of Abraham, right? What Jesus is really saying at another level is not just to them, these sinners eating at my table were lost, and now they're found. And we should be celebrating their return, not punishing them. There's no vengeance here, as we were talking about last week. There's no sense of punishing. They've already been punished by their distance. These sinners have come back. They are prodigals, and we should love them and embrace them. But what Jesus is also doing here is saying to the Pharisees, your father Jacob, Israel, has, in a sense, become prodigal. They have sold their birthright. They're lost. And they need to come back, and I need to embrace them. I'm loving them. I will love Jacob. I will love Israel as I always loved them as Jehovah. I will embrace them and kiss them and bring them home. And you should too. But he's also very much saying to the Pharisees, you're also lost. You are also prodigals. And you also need to, you'll find that there is a loving Father that can be there. Now, that in some way would be distasteful to them, because in tying it to Jacob and Esau, they would say, Esau left the faith. Esau was unfaithful. Esau married the Hittite women. Esau cannot be a symbol for this. And what I think Jesus would be saying to him is, if Esau could do it, so much more so can your Heavenly Father do it. And so much more so can I do it. Jacob, come home. Back to your birthright. And like I say, brothers and sisters, I had not seen that until this week. That Jesus has created another layer of the prodigal son all the way back to Jacob and Esau. Just terrific and just powerful. So we get these side by side reconciliations of Jacob and Esau, and father and prodigal son, and they are the same. Very, very cool. Okay, now, one last layer that I want to put on this is we're talking about the fact that striving and holding on leads us to be Israel, which means there is a reconciliation coming. If we will just hang on through our wrestling and don't let go, be it iron rod or be it faith. And it is one more parallel that comes in an interesting place, and it shouldn't be lost on us at all. And it comes here with Enos. Who was Enos's father? Jacob. Behold, it came to pass that I, Enos, knowing my father Jacob, the heel grabber. Oh, no, that's their patriarchal father, who Jacob was named after, most likely. Knowing that my father Jacob, he was a just man, and he taught me in his language, and also in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And then, what does Enos do? Well, you know. I will tell you of the wrestle, which I had before God, before I received a remission of my sins. Wrestling, striving, heel grabbing, not letting go until we have made it through and received the promised reconciliation. That remission is the reconciliation of returning to the presence of God, who is waiting for us like the father of the prodigal son, waiting for us like Esau, to love us and fall on our neck and kiss us, because we are now comfortable back in his presence. Brothers and sisters, I think that's our challenge. Our challenge is very, very much about wrestling, and our wrestling in our life seems to be unrelenting, and at each age there is a different wrestle for us. At each stage of our spiritual development there is a wrestle. We watch our kids wrestle, we watch our grandkids wrestle. But we also have the inner wrestle that Paul talks about. I do not do the things I want to do, but I do the things that I hate. I'm wrestling with myself and the principalities of darkness. And then he says in triumphant in Romans 8, and nothing can separate me from the love of God, because I have successfully strived with God and men and received my reconciliation. Brothers and sisters, I bear you my testimony that the Lord knows that this mortality was going to be a wrestle, and it was not going to be easy. He has provided a way to seek out and find His love and give us the promised blessings if we just hang on a little while longer until we realize everything that He has in mind for us. I pray that we can do that on this day and through this week, to strive and hold on. And I leave that with you in Jesus' name. Amen.